were not in my last session or don't know, my name is Ro. I'm part of the Nonprofit Center at LaSalle University. Real quick introduction, we've been there for 43 years, part of the School of Business, specifically to help nonprofits do what they do really great. We say we're not really here to tell you how to do what you do, we're here to come alongside you and make sure that you can do it well. So, that's my real quick pitch about the Nonprofit Center. All right, we're gonna jump right in here. Here are some basic responsibilities for boards. And our last session we did a lot of this, and everyone has the slides in your booklet today too. So you'll have a lot of those things. But wanted to give you some real quick, like here are some of those basic board responsibilities that you have. So if no one's ever told you, you do have to ensure that their legal and ethical integrity is a thing. If no one told you that you are legally responsible for this organization, hear me say it, you are legally responsible for them. I say all the time, if the IRS comes knocking on the door for questions, they're coming to you. Because they want to know what happened. And they're going to ask you questions. And I don't know is not an answer they will take. So, you need to make sure that you are legally working within the guidelines. I will say too, in the state of Pennsylvania, if your organization is here in the state, in terms of legal guidelines, you need to have 3 board members over the age of 18 who are not all blood related, unless you are a family foundation and you're focused in that particularly. You need to make sure that you are filing your 990, and if you have employees, paying your payroll taxes. You also need to make sure that in terms of the bylaws that you write, that you are in compliance with the bylaws. There are not a ton of legal obligations that most nonprofits have. A lot of them fall within the ethical aspect of running a nonprofit. So, the next one definitely is building a competent board. I know that it's a weird word. I don't love that word, but really figuring out the best board composition for your organization. Someone mentioned earlier in our big group session about building that board matrix. I will reiterate this here. You do need to have that. I know it can feel icky putting it on paper and checking boxes about who's in the room, but it's real important. Take stock of who's sitting around your table and make sure that you know who you have in the room, and then put on there also who you're missing. And so that you can go out in the community or go out and kind of look for those folks that you need. With building your board matrix and figuring out how you're gonna put your board together, be realistic of what your organization needs. I mentioned this to my last group. If you're getting ready to build a building, you might want an architect on your board. They might not stay for forever, but having that expertise, real helpful. You might be getting ready to go into providing housing for people. And so maybe someone who has a little bit of knowledge about realty and can give you that insight on your board based on all the things that, working on your board, that'd be really helpful to you. Figure out what it is your board needs, put it on paper. I will also say with that, it is the board's responsibility to build your board. Too often the ED is the person who gets stuck with that, and so they're the one always looking for new board members and bringing them to the board to vet and do the whole process. Your executive director or CEO should be helping, but it's really ultimately the responsibilities at the feet of the board. You need to be making sure that you have a pipeline of folks who are going to be able to funnel through. You need to be looking at who you have around the table and what you're missing, and you need to be really responsible for what that looks like. I will bring in something from our last session that hopefully, I'm sorry for folks that were just here, but I learned this from somebody a long time ago. You need to have these 3 Ds around your board table, and you need to make sure that they're balanced as much as humanly possible. You need to have folks who are door openers for your organization, really good networkers who can get you in touch with some folks, partners, funders, other organizations, but their gifting is in door opening for you. You need to have folks who are doers. Every board needs to make sure that you have people that are actually doing the stuff. Doing the stuff might be greeting people in the hallway for sessions. It might be helping set up tables and chairs. It might be breaking down stuff. Doers. Those folks who are willing to pound the pavement and get out there and really connect in that way, it might be the gifting that they have and you need them around your board table. The last one is always controversial, but it's also important. You do need donors around your table. You need folks who that's their ability. It might also be the way that they want to interact with your organization. Most people are going to be a mixture of those things, but there's one that kind of bubbles up as their main thing. So you might have someone who is able to write you checks for fundraisers and all these other capital campaigns, but they really enjoy going out and making connections to other people as well. But their job, or maybe the things that they do outside of this, don't allow them to do that on a regular basis. So they might be a 40% of a door opener and a 60% of a donor. But write that down, figure out where you are lopsided, and then put that into your matrix of who you're looking for. Because you want to make sure that all of those things do exist. You're going to be helping determine the mission, the vision. I'm going to put the values in here too. the purpose, and ensure the effective planning and monitoring of your organization. That is something that the board has to kind of help steward. Mostly because you are the person who directly is overseeing the executive director or CEO, so you need to be evaluating that person on a regular basis. If you are not doing evaluation, please don't raise your hand and tell me that. But just make sure you're doing it for your ED. You also need to make sure that you keep the ship, essentially, going in the right direction in terms of your mission, vision, purpose, and values. You are helping to steer it as you go. That means also sometimes using those filters to filter out who you do not kind of partner with. Had an organization who had this opportunity to connect with a huge funder who was willing to write them a very nice check. And so they came to, they're like, hey, we think this is a thing we could do. Like, we want to talk through what it would be and da-da-da-da. And so as we're talking through it and they're really giving me these like concerns started bubbling up from staff members of this other organization and some of the background of the organization and what was really happening. And I was like, well, it sounds like to me that they're not aligned with some of the values of your org. Yeah, but have you seen the zeros on that check? I did. But what would you be giving up by saying yes to this? Ultimately, they decided, because it was their choice, not to go with this particular partner to the chagrin of the development person who was like, are you kidding me? Okay. But a couple months later, come to find out that person was really shady dealings in their business and they were trying to find the best like public publicity stunt and they had picked this org as their publicity stunt. You do not need partnerships with everybody. All money is not good money. So you need to be making sure that as part of your board planning and putting together and stewarding your organization, that you drive all of those things through these filters. Your ED also should be doing those things. It's not just your board, but ultimately the board's really job is to make sure that you're taking care of the organization. And part of that is making good decisions for the org as a whole.
Can you repeat that part about not all good money is good money?
Not all money is good money. Yeah. Some money is not for you. And you might really be impressed by it, but you do not want it. Now, it might be something that you could potentially, again, if they're a terrible organization, please don't recommend them to anybody else. But it could be that maybe this doesn't fit for you, but it could fit for somebody else and be okay with passing that information to them. But yeah, not all money is good money. Protecting the assets, managing the resources wisely, and ensuring fiscal oversight. Again, I say, if something were to happen for the finances of your org, the IRS is coming to ask you. So when you come to board meetings, making sure you really understand what those financials are saying. I don't have a finance background, and it's not my thing, but I had to learn in order to serve on a board what all those documents the treasurer was putting together meant so that I really understood them. Because you are responsible for passing your budget. And how are you passing a budget for stuff that you don't understand? So you need to make sure that's something that you got. Then also in terms of the actual organization, making sure that you're stewarding the resources very wisely. There are a lot of folks who serve from the for-profit world, which most of you are coming for that, on nonprofit boards. We love that because it's really helpful to bring this huge expertise from the for-profit world. There is a difference, though, between for-profits and nonprofits, obviously, in that for-profits are creating a thing, and their value is that they create a thing that people want to buy. It could be a wholesale thing, but they're creating a thing and people want to buy the thing. For nonprofits, your value is that the money that folks are giving to you, you utilize it in the best way humanly possible to serve your community. So as a board, how are you making sure that you are stewarding those resources very well? Because as a donor, I am ensuring and entrusting in you the funding that I'm giving you, however dollar amount it is, to make sure that that's what you're doing. So you're helping to kind of steward what that means in terms of where it goes, what it looks like, and how you make those decisions. Ensure adequate resources. The F word that everyone loves is fundraising. It's everyone's favorite word. It's more than just fundraising. And I say all the time that you need to get out of an idea of fundraising and into an idea of a culture of philanthropy for your organization. And part of it is really looking at, we have all these resources, how much do we need to run the place? You need to make sure the lights stay on, people get paid. But then you also have all these programs and services that you have to be offering. How do you make sure as a board member that you're able to do those things and take care of the people who are working for you as well? There's this common thing that working for nonprofits mean you never make any money, so why do any of us do this? But it's a passion for a lot of people, and they do that. We have to get away from, and this is a larger conversation than just this room right now, get away from this concept that you can't work for nonprofits and make a decent living. It's ludicrous. But part of the board's thing is really making sure that you're using those resources to make sure that you give folks an adequate pay. Not just adequate, it should be good pay. I'm not saying overpay them, but in general. But also making sure that your programs are not suffering. for that. So in order to balance those like kind of lines, the board has to figure that out. They have to figure out how to make sure they're bringing in the funding, make sure it's either grants or dollar, whatever that looks like, to make sure that this is taking place. It is also really important when you think about things like equity for your organization, how you're doing that in terms of your pay and what that looks like for your org. We'll talk about that a little bit, but just in general. Also, your mouthpiece for the org. You might not be the person who's always going out there to do all this stuff, but you should be able to ensure this public standing. How does the community view the organization that you are a part of? You should both know that and also be helping to always uphold or improve it. You should be making sure that you talk on behalf of your organization. Making sure that you're going out and you hear people talking about potential really good partnerships, like, hey, I would love to talk to you about X, Y, and Z. Let me just give you some more information about it. Can we sit down and talk? That should be a thing you do. I serve as the board president for a camp in Montgomery County and have for the past couple of years been a board member. And so one of the things that we did when they wrongfully elected me as president last year was I made everybody come up with a pitch. And they had to have it cold in terms of why we are so valuable to Montgomery County. So this particular camp has been around for 50 plus years. It is originally founded by the county. What I love about Camp Rainbow is that on our 18-acre property out in Montgomery County, we actually provide a camp experience from that June to August timeframe for individuals who are students, part of usually Title I schools, and every family that comes through our doors pretty much is on TANF. We can make sure that the cost of going to camp, which is very expensive if you've ever had a kid that goes to camp, is not more than $50 for every kid that walks in the door. And if a family can't pay that $50, we have scholarships to make sure they can actually come to camp. We never want a family to ever not be able to take part in that experience because of the funding. So our board spends a lot of time making sure that we have the ability to put that together. The amount of times that I have had a kid who walked in the door on the first day of camp, hating the fact that I asked for their cell phone to give back to their parents because we don't have cell phones on camp, and was crying because they were upset, and left at the end of camp crying because they didn't want to leave, all the time. The experience of being able to provide them those opportunities is invaluable to them and also to me. And so when I'm talking to partners, the very next thing I say is, how do you want to make sure that continues happening? How can you want to sit down? I'd love to have you come visit camp. It's gorgeous. And so I made sure that every single person on our board knew exactly what we did and could articulate it really well. Everyone should be talking about your org from your board. They should always be thinking about how they can connect in a way, because that is part of the responsibility of board members. This last one is really, again, I talked about it a little bit, that you are both hiring, supporting, monitoring, evaluating your ED or CEO. That is your job to make sure that you're doing that. In the event that you do have to fire your CEO, making sure that's done in the proper channels. One of the things not up here is like whistleblower situations. If you're ever in a situation like that, that's part of the board's responsibility as well, to make sure that you steward the organization through those as well.
I'm not sure if you're going to go into this in any more depth later, but can you describe a little bit what the evaluation of the chief executive should look like? Like, is it the board as a whole, or does it go through like a committee first, or?
So for your evaluation of your ED specifically, the board should also make sure they're getting connection from the staff, because that's who works for their ED. There are a bunch of different matrices you can use for evaluating. You might have one already, or maybe you have one that you really like from your job. Most people don't, but maybe you do. It really should come down to a couple of things. One, what their goals are for the organization as a whole. The second one is how best to work with the board to reach those things and what it's going to look like. And then what it is that they understand in terms of the need of the community as a whole. You craft that however you want to in terms of asking those questions. It doesn't have to be a bajillion questions that they fill out. I know for a fact that I hate doing my personal evaluation every year because it takes forever. Don't do that. Make it a process that's a conversation, but really figuring out what pieces of it in terms of the board work do you want to do. The entire board, depending on the size of your board, could take part in it. If you have a board of 7 people, you could do that. If you have a really big board, elect a committee of folks who potentially will do that. Could be your board chair, vice chair, those folks, or anyone who's really interested in doing that type of work. But I would say depending on the size of your board, it could be everyone on the board, but also could just be a select committee of them. Some people have an executive committee, and that's who the person I would kind of delegate that to. But they definitely need to be talking to the staff about that evaluation. Similarly, not also on this list, boards should be evaluating themselves every year. And I don't mean sit around your table and go, we did a great job, high five. No, I need you to actually ask the ED, ask the staff, ask your partners Same questions in terms of the goals of the organization, what the needs are of the community, and how you're going to achieve them. So you want to figure out the best way to evaluate your work as well. All right, so I'm going to show you this and then do the thing I always tell people not to do and pull up another picture that's not on these slides, and so I'm sorry. But these are some of the life cycles of an organization. And this is one of those things, this one is a little contrived, and so that's why I have another one that I want to show you as well, in terms of where you might be on this continuum. We start all over here in phase one. Phase one is that brand new organization that's really, they're happy. These people are creatively happy, they are real excited, they have a lot of passion, they are getting invested, they are like, how are we gonna do this thing? All hands on deck is over here in phase one. So when you're probably that 1 to 5-ish years, probably say 3 years depending on the org's type, this is where you are right here. Some of these blips that you'll see as we go through are where you'll have some of these like crises that will take place, and it's a real thing that you will feel. At some point through this real excitement of doing things, here you don't have any staff members usually. The board does it all. And so at some point you have this crisis of leadership of like, okay, in order to expand, we have to figure out who's going to be leading this thing. And I don't mean like we need a new board chair, I mean like, do we need to hire an executive director? What is that going to look like? And so you have this blip that usually pops up in terms of like, okay, in order to get us to the next phase, we got to figure out who our leadership is going to be. Then you go into the next phase where you're just trying to figure out a lot of your direction. Okay, what are we going to do next? We have done the thing, we've done our 501c paperwork, we have been established, we have been out there pounding the pavement, getting our fundraising together. Everyone's really doing the thing. We got to the leadership, we found somebody who was willing to work for us, thank goodness. And now, in this direction phase of where we're going next, the next blip you'll run into is this crisis of autonomy. How do you then separate out, because the board's been doing everything, what the board should continue doing and overseeing and what the staff now needs to take over, even if it's a staff of just one. In between these two, the ED is really connected to the board. BD always going to be connected, but they're real connected because again, they're probably by themselves. Some volunteers hopefully are helping them do the work. But when it comes to this piece, you're really going to start separating out who's going to do what. You get into this next thing of delegating the who's going to do the what. It might be that you only have one staff member, but so then you're bringing on a huge group of like high capacity volunteers who are going to be helping you to really do the thing. I think of those orgs where they do a lot of maybe housing placement, and so they have one person who's leading and then a bunch of different types of folks who are helping do like consulting for housing. They're doing the intake paperwork, they're helping people really get their information down, they're going through all those pieces, but they're usually like volunteers doing that. Then the ED is really then going into like, how do we get them funding for housing or find them housing or all of those pieces of it. You're delegating then also, what does the board do? What does that look like for the board? Now we've officially have these people over here doing the work of the organization that back here we were all wrapping our hands around. So what do we do next? The crisis here is usually that crisis of control. Because the board is coming to a spot where they no longer have to do all the stuff and they have to let the staff do the thing. That is hard for folks, especially when you work with the founder of an organization, to start breaking out how they are going to let them kind of take over some of those things. Do you have a question? No? Okay. I'm not sure raising your hand. And I want to like be weird. I was like, okay. So you hit this like blip of, okay, what does that look like? The next one is really then coordinating. We have to let them take over. They have to be able to actually run the day-to-day operations. As board members, you're not there. Please hear me tell you, do not ask for a seat in their staff meetings. I've had it happen. Or an office, at the office, not a thing. You're not a staff member or board member. Different. You have to work together, but you are not a staff member on the day-to-day basis. So you need to be making sure that they can take control of the things they need to take control of. They got to be able to work it. And you have to give them that ability to do that. You get into this coordination phase. And I'm going to go to the next slide and then do the thing that I told you not to do. In this coordination that's coming in through here, this one's really helpful because it breaks down a lot of these other pieces. It's looking at really like, how do you coordinate that relationship between the board and the staff? You might be maybe adding one other staff member, or maybe you've got like a few staff members you've now added. And so you're coordinating, okay, how do we get good communication? What does it look like to make sure that we're monitoring, but we're not, again, asking for seats at the staff meeting? How do we make sure that we're like having that opportunity for them to tell us the things they need us to do and us do the things without stepping on their toes. And so you're coordinating in that. That is also a real rocky moment, because then you have the folks of like the board is overstepping and they're doing too many things and maybe they're not showing up in the way that you actually need them to. That's why good communication, especially when it comes to that coordination phase, is critical. Two things usually happen, or one of two things happens in that phase. It becomes the spot where we get a lot of the fluffy reports show up. They're not really honest reports from your ED. So that happens sometimes because they're like, we'll just tell them all the great stuff. None of the problems. Because again, the thing that happened before this was that crisis of control, and so the ED's like, we'll just hold on to that stuff and tell them all of the like sugar-coated rainbows that pop up. You get that, or you get the, oh my gosh, everything's falling apart, I need your help, and one of those two things happens. Finding a balance between those is really important. As a board, you need honest feedback from your team. They have to tell you the challenges that they're encountering, and if they don't, you can't help them. But you have to foster a relationship through both communication and actually how you have a relationship with them, that they're bringing you the honesty of where they kind of are at. This is where I'm going to do the thing I told you not to do, because I think it's important to see it in a different way. It might be helpful to folks. So bear with me, because this picture here is another way to think about these phases. And I think it's another way to clear it up for folks who've never heard this before. Remember I said in the beginning, everyone's really happy and everyone's hunky-dory. This one you have that idea. Here's this idea of the thing. We're going to start this thing. We're real excited. We get to the startup phase of it where everyone's like, this is fantastic. We love it. This is great. You get to the growth when you hire that first person. And so you have some things that you're putting in place for what this will look like. Here's where you coast into maturity. Maturity is part of, and for the other one that you see in your booklet, that coordination piece, like all those consolidation pieces are in maturity. I like this because it puts all those things together and says this is where the organization really kind of hits its stride, if you will. But the reason I picked this picture in particular that the other one does not have is the other side. There is a potential at some point for an organization to hit this regeneration piece. Typically it happens when the founder gets ready to leave. You've been around for a while, you've hit that stride, everything's going really well, and then something happens where they want to retire, or I stopped using the get hit by a bus situation because people said it was morbid. So instead they win the lottery. That's my new thing. So they win the lottery and decide to leave, or they decide to retire. And so you have a crisis that happens at that point because, okay, this person who started with us is now deciding to leave. What do we do? So that regeneration point can do a couple of things. Decline is not a bad term. Please don't hear this like, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? It could be in that decline phase that you have to start evaluating some stuff. So you have to hire maybe the new ED because the founder who was the ED's left. Or you need to maybe like reestablish the structure of your organization and figure out what that is. So it feels like that decline is going to be terrible, but it's really an opportunity that people need to see. Here's where the X for the X's is where you hit that go, no-go moment. In your decline, you can either come back around to this opportunity of growth because you've either hired a new ED, and so you're putting new leadership in place, or you've restructured the way that your leadership is going to be. It could be that your funders have changed. Sometimes funders decide they want to start funding other stuff, and so that's an impact for the organization. But when you make that turnaround, you go back to this opportunity for growth. The other option is that if things continue into crisis, you do go into this terminal, we need to close the organization doors, da-da-da-da. We hope that that's not where you go, always. It might be something that you need to do, but we hope that's not the case. We try and catch people here. That X is where you try and catch people. But if you don't recognize that's where you are, then you're in trouble because you can continue sliding down the scale. So a lot of the times when we get called, or when folks like us get called, it's because they're like, okay, our ED left or some other funding thing happened. We need some support and additional assistance to figure out how to get back to growth. This can happen a lot throughout the life of your organization. That's okay. Do not think, oh my gosh, we're not a great organization because we keep... It's okay. If it happens every year, ask questions. because that's a thing you want to know. But in general, leadership's going to change. So you have an ED that's great now, and maybe they decide they want to take a new job, and so they leave in 3 years. Or you have a great board of folks who are coming in real engaged, and then in a couple of years they start rolling off because the term limits are up. And you got to start going again, building back into, okay, what do we need? Who do we need at the table? What is that going to look like? So that could happen over the course of an organization's life. You have to, as a board member, be catching those stages. That goes back to the honest communication that you're having with your team. Do they tell you we're having issues in this spot so that you can catch it before you get past the point of like no return? Too often what happens is people that come to that decline phase see it as, oh my gosh, this is terrible, and throw in the towel. And so their only option at that point is to let the doors close. Because instead of catching it then and saying, hey, what can we do to turn the corner, they took it as a, all things are off, sell off the assets, we're done. You don't have to do that. Now, if your organization wants to, that's, you know, your business. I'm not gonna tell you not to, that's what you wanna do. But do not take that sign of decline of the change of leadership or anything else that takes place as like, this is the end. This is something that happens a lot. Any organization who's been around for a couple decades can tell you, oh yeah, definitely have done this. We've been around for 43 years. We had, I don't know if anybody heard Karen. Karen was our original executive director when the center first got founded. I think she wanted to say she was there for about 15 years and then decided to move on. Opportunity right there where we were like, okay, crap, what are we gonna do? I wasn't there, but in general. Then the next executive director we had was there for 22 years. So that's 2 long stretches of folks who were in the door. And both times, based on all the information that I had been given, I was there when the second person retired. They had this moment of like, oh crap, what are we gonna do if this person leaves? Because they have a lot and they hold a lot. But thankfully, we have enough folks who do this on a regular basis to be like, okay, great. How do we turn the corner instead of just closing the doors? And so on both of them, looking for interim EDs or the next person to come through the door, but also reestablishing for us, because we're part of a university, what our relationship was with the university, which is essentially our funder for all intents and purposes, so that they were aware also where we were doing, what we were going through, to be able to make that turnaround was really important. But you have to catch these things. It is okay to go through those phases mindfully, because they just happen. And especially if you are with an organization from the very beginning, then you'll see these things over time. The other part is the board that you start off with in the beginning, that really dig in, get your hands dirty board, may not be the board that you need when you get to maturity. And be honest with the fact that if you need different folks, that conversation needs to happen. Typically what happens for most people that are starting organizations, they know that they need some people who are going to dig in because they don't have any other staff members. And so they'll tell people, if they've done it correctly, we're going to look at a 5-year term because we need 5 years to get going. If after 5 years you want to stick with us, love to have you. But knowing that the role of the board will change after 5 years, if you want to roll out, that's okay. And for a lot of people who have hopefully done some of their own soul searching, they know for themselves whether they are the stick into and do, get their hands dirty folks, and also the help just kind of steward, or they're just the I want to get my hands dirty folks. But having that conversation is real important. Because not everybody is in the stewarding business. And that's okay. Not everyone's meant to be a sea captain. But you have to find the folks who are willing to do that. And throughout that first 5 years, they'll start replacing people potentially as they go, to have more people that have like longevity mindsets for their board and what that might look like. Yep.
As far as best practice for the length of a term, what would you say?
So I use best practice in quotation marks, and you can tell everybody why. You don't have to, because we're trying to move away from that concept of best practice. Okay. But I will say one of the things that I found helpful is that you look at it either between a 2 and 3 year term for board members, and then you decide if they are going to roll completely off or if they want to leave. I say leave, and I don't mean please don't disappear from the organization. People think they get fired from the board after their term is over. No. Go volunteer or take part in a non-voting committee as part of, continuing to lead the org. And then if you write in your bylaws, they could roll back into a board that's a voting board member or not. You get to decide. We have found really good success with that 3 years because you get a little bit of time to get onboarded, figure out the thing in that first year. Then you hit your stride in the second year, and then you help start planning for what the next person's going to take over in the third year. But yeah, you definitely want to have term limits. Please, for the love of God, put them in your bylaws. And also, do not be those folks that like put 3 years, and then when it comes to the second year, nobody wants to leave, and so they change it to 5 years. And then it comes to the fourth year, nobody wants to leave, and they change it to 7 year. Don't do that. You need new folks to come on your board. And I'm not saying everyone's going to disappear all at once. Hopefully not. But you need to have new revolving voices that come through the door. All right, I'll go back to my other slides because that's important.
Ro,
Yes?
you said, so you just said 2 to 3 years, but then before that you said 5-year term. How was that in relation to what you just said?
5 years was like, usually for like that growing phase is like the first 5.
Okay.
So when you're first starting an organization, you
Yeah.
like have that conversation with,
Okay.
yes, we would like you to be here for that 5-year term, because there's a whole lot of stuff you will screw up in the first 2,
Right.
and then you actually get to serve in the next 3.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
In reality, it's just the truth. For your established boards, 3 years is probably what you're looking at. Yeah. Okay. So, continuing to talk some more about this, and if you go back to this guy, we're about. Does that have a pointer thing on it? I don't want to touch it and mess it up. Nope, I can do that. The red tape here into the growth. Once you get really established through here, one of the things you're going to need is to continue to grow. You need money to grow your staff. Can't hire people and not pay them. So one of the things that the board is really going to help figure out is how best to find those good collaborators in order to grow. Because you help decide who those big time funders are going to be. Again, if your ED is a one-person show, they can't do that and provide the service and oversee the volunteers and. So the board is still doing a lot of that. But that's a really good spot for them to be in. Leaning on those folks who are door openers to help you figure that out, they're made for that. This is a really good spot if you are have the ability to have some of those long-term grants kick in, if that is something that your organization is eligible for. Long-term grants are those grants where they, with the funder, will say, we will fund you for the course of 3-5 years. That phase is really helpful for that. If you can find them at any point, that's when you find them at any point. Typically, they're real skittish about doing this up front unless they're maybe your fiscal sponsor. But they're real like, okay, let's see if you can hold on to this for a little bit before we want to jump into this longer term like funding. But making sure that in order to get through that growth piece of it, you have some of those that balance out some of the like once a month donors or smaller donors or grants that you potentially could get, potentially not get. Figuring out what that looks like is the next piece of it. And the crisis that happens at the end is really, you've been a fantastic board. The doors didn't close. You found the great funders. You're doing the things. How do we make sure we are needed? You are still needed. One, because the government says you have to have a board so you can't disappear. So there's that piece of it. But 2, you're going to be able to continue through this maturity piece of it, really making sure the identity of the organization keeps up. This is when you get to the spot where you are really helping to filter all the stuff and helping to kind of steer where the organization goes. You need to make sure that all of those collaborations that you've established and all that funding that you kind of helped come in the door, you're really kind of overseeing some of that stuff and making sure that it's still working for your organization. Making sure that you need to flex where you need to flex. It might be that you get to this point and you're trying to figure out if you need to buy a bigger building or rent a bigger space. Maybe you're not ready to buy a building just yet. All of those things might happen in that kind of phase. And the identity goes from, okay, we're no longer a startup. We've established some things, our name is out there, we've gotten some funders who believe in our cause and are kind of partnering with us. Now we need to make sure that we are maintaining all of that stuff. Because you cannot act like a startup on that end. It is real hard for the staff to do what they need to do and the board's still doing all the stuff. And so making sure that along the way, even if you don't think of it exactly like this chart kind of lays out, that you see the areas where the board needs to shift. We need to go from everyone's all hands on deck to we need to let the staff do the thing to now we need to be going out and really being that vocal piece to make sure we're getting funding in the door and figuring out what that looks like, to now we just need to be helping make sure that things are going really well. That is not to say that you are coasting. There's still stuff you have to do. Because At any point in time, something will change for your organization. So you're not coasting. Do not think that you have done all your stuff. It's kind of like raising your kids and you're like, they're adults now, they got this, it's fine. No, because they might come in the door because something happened and they don't have a place to live anymore. Things happen. Hopefully that's not the case, but you never know. So you want to make sure that on that side, you're helping to really guide everything. One of the pieces that's really important here, as you continue to grow your staff, is that you know about the skill set around your table. You always need to know that. This is really critical at this point, because if there's a issue or something happening in marketing, the marketer should know they can come to their board, because they either have someone who's on marketing or knows something about marketing or any one of those things. So you need to make sure, in terms of that, like helping to coach, that the staff knows the skill set they have in you. Over here, the person who's the marketer on the board does the marketing. That's their job. Over here, they just help kind of facilitate some of those things. So your staff needs to know, who can I go to when we're stuck with this marketing thing? Who can I go to because I don't understand this finance thing? Who can I go to when I don't understand this leadership problem? They should be coming to you. Part of your support of the organization is bringing your skill sets in the door and making sure that they can come to you with those questions. Now, how you facilitate that, up to you. If it has to always run through the executive director, they might be too busy to do some of those things. But if your staff feels like they know you as people, then they will come to you as people. One of my favorite ways to talk about this one in particular, for both life cycles and also board responsibilities, we got to a point a couple of decades ago, mostly in the 90s, early 2000s, where boards became the gods up on Mount Olympus that just sat there passing things down to everyone else who's going to do this stuff. And the disconnect became that the staff on the ground didn't really know the people up on the mountain. And so they didn't go to the people on the mountain. They also were doing really bad performances for the people on the mountain and telling them all the fluffy stuff with the rainbows, because they don't know them. They don't know what kind of help they can bring to them with challenges. They don't know what skill set they have coming in the door to help them solve problems. So it is incumbent on the board to come off the mountain to get to know the team on the ground who does the stuff on a regular basis, so that it's not just, I think we have a person who does marketing on our board, but it's, oh, I can go ask Ro this question and she can help us figure this out. Oh, I can ask so-and-so this thing and they can help us work through this. That is part of who you should be, especially when you get to that point. Because now you have hired a really great director, you have a couple other folks on there, you were just helping them do the thing, supporting the work that they do. There are still decisions, like I said, that you will have to make as the org continues to grow, or if something happens in the organization. But when you get to that point, you are really just the support. And that's what you want to do. It's part of who it is. This is another kind of like laying out of this and seeing what it looks like in terms of what this means too. The board rolls this piece here, and you'll see this hands-on deck here. Still a little bit of hands-on, but you're moving a little way away from that. Then you're really volunteering in terms of some of those pieces. Now that you got everybody kind of set up down here on this end, where it's all institutionalized, you're helping to oversee it, but you're not doing the thing. That's important to remember. You want to make sure that folks feel like they have the supports so that they can be nimble, that they can do those things. You've maybe set up departments now. You figured out the best way to set up your committees. My note about committees is, I know a long time ago in our best practices, we told you have to have an executive committee, a governance committee, a finance committee, a fundraising committee, committee. You do not need to have all those committees if they don't suit your organization. Figure out the committees that you want and that you need, and those are the ones you write into your bylaws. You could have an events committee that only is around for like an event and then disperse. That's okay. Write it into your bylaws that way, but it is okay to do that. So you're looking at that in terms of setting all of that stuff up. How you formalize all of that for your organization is really important. I'm gonna stop before we get to the next one. Any big ideas, ahas, you know where you are for your org at this moment? Yeah? Okay, I see some people nodding their head, but like, I see some of those faces like, not so sure. Coming through this piece here, this is that same picture on the side. We talk about like a lot of the responsibilities, of course, that pop up too. When you're looking at this, especially in the beginning, the board does all of it, right? You're the marketer, you're the fundraiser, you do all of the like tech stuff, you do the strategic planning, you do all of it. When you start hiring a staff, there are pieces that you need to keep holding on to and pieces that you just need to speak into. So the community outreach is something that you both hold on to and speak into. Because like, as I said, you gotta be going out there and getting to know people. The programs, you speak into but you don't hold on to any longer. They have to be able to run their programs without fear that you're gonna come in and tell them they did something wrong. You oversee if there are issues, and you need to make sure that you understand the programs, but you are not the person running the programs anymore. In terms of new programs or piloting programs, they should feel like they can come and discuss that with you, but ultimately it's on the staff to really actually do the thing. If they have questions, you guys talk about it. Yep.
For the programs, who should be establishing like the performance measures? Is that the executive director or is that the board?
Performance measures for programs, for the folks running the programs is the executive director, because they're their boss. Performance measures for if the program itself is successful, board. And that's based on the mission, the vision, and all of those pieces of it, what you have heard from community and what they tell you they need, and also what the organization is supposed to be doing. So if you are in a spot where it's like, we're gonna start a new, I'll go back to housing again, how the housing program actually runs on day to day, executive director and the staff. What the housing program looks like in terms of the overall, like how much money we can pump into it, how we're gonna actually be able to do this, board. And then you set, of course, in terms of that, if we're able to place 55 families this year, how close did we get to that, what did it look like, all of that is you kind of over evaluating that. Strategic planning. Who's involved with strategic planning or who's in charge of it? I'll start that.
Board.
Say again?
The board.
The board?
Yeah.
I heard somebody else say something.
With the executive director.
So, if you've never done a strategic plan, whew, I envy you. No. Strategic planning is a lot and everyone has to be involved. Too often it either gets driven by the staff or driven by the board. It needs to be both. Because both of those entities need to talk into your strat plan. My suggestion for people now when we do strategic planning is you make it no longer than 3 years. The world has changed too much post-2020 to make it any longer. I would say do it 2 years, but by the time you get to the 2-year mark, you just finish implementing and you're just spending your time strategic planning, and that's not fun. But 3 years gives you a little bit of roadmap. 5 is way too long at this juncture. 3 years is a time where you can actually implement some stuff. And doing your strategic planning has to involve your board and your staff. If your board is just getting a strategic plan that your staff did and signing off on it, that's not gonna work. Because part of a strategic plan is how does the board speak into it, where's the board gonna go over the next 3 years, both in terms of composition, in terms of the work they wanna do and connections they're gonna make, and so they have to be part of that conversation. The staff is gonna actually have to carry the load of the programs you're gonna implement or close or the other partnerships you're going to be doing, so they have to be part of that conversation. So both need to be accountable for your strategic plan. And in terms of the actual implementation of it, both should also be accountable for that. If you ever write a strategic plan and there's only stuff in it for the staff or only stuff in it for the board, that's not a good strategic plan. And I don't care who they are, if you get a consultant that tells you that that's okay, tell them that I said that that's not a thing, and they can come find me later, it's fine. Because when we do strategic planning, it is very intentional that board members have to take part. I don't need the entire board to show up at every meeting because they have jobs and they have other stuff to do, but somebody's got to be there every step of the way. Okay? In terms of the firing and the hiring of staff, that is in the discretion of the executive director and like the executive team. So when you get there, so if you have like other director levels of departments, that is their business. There are times when, like I said, there are whistleblower situations or things like that that have to get elevated to the board, and they have to kind of take a hand in that. But in terms of the day-to-day running of who's hired and fired, that is up to the executive director. Trust that they're going to do that job. Now, with that, if you have set really good direction in terms of the mission, the vision, the values of your organization, the type of culture of equity that you want to have, they should have a good filter for how they do their hiring. If you find that you look around and it doesn't reflect those pieces, raise questions. Ask them about that process. You don't need to be sitting there for every single one of those interviews that they do for hiring the manager for volunteers or things like that. But if you look around and it's not reflective of the things you know are part of your mission, vision, values, and that piece, ask questions. Because there might be a disconnect, or there might actually be a problem. Because you have to oversee that those pieces are taken care of. They do it, you need to make sure that it actually happens. And I don't mean, again, this micromanaging way of you show up at every interview, but you need to have a pulse on who's around the table to make sure that you know that those things are taking place. Does everyone have values or value statements at their org? Yeah? It's not a shaming moment because a lot of people don't think this is important. It is. If you have not ever stated values for your organization, put them on paper. It's part of your strategic plan, or it should be. Again, if you have a consultant that doesn't say that, tell them I said no. But you can do that at any time and just come up with the values for your organization. Strategic planning is the natural time for it to take place. Your values do not have to be so meta and so big, and be honest. So you've already heard of this. But one of the things that we have as a value at the Nonprofit Center, just because that's who we are as people, we like to have good conversation over good food. So we wrote it down. It's a value we have. Some of our best work has been done over lunch. It's because we're just sitting around talking and enjoying, hey, what do you eat? So that's how we built it into our values. It is a thing we do on a regular basis. Sometimes we will try out a new Thai place or somebody else because everyone's a foodie on our team. And so even when we hire people, one of the questions I have asked them is, what is your favorite food? Because if you are a person who doesn't like to eat, you will not do well on this team. And they look at you like, yeah, I'm like, just being honest. Because if you're one of those people that doesn't do lunch, probably not going to have a good time when you're all sitting in the conference room having lunch and talking about the thing that we're working on. We also value people. And so we say that people come first. And that goes into both the work that we do, but also how we interact with folks, is that we think about them as people first. Yes, there's lots of work to be done, but it always impacts people. So one of our values is people comes first. Over policy, over procedures, over a lot of other stuff, it's all about people first. That has changed the way that we interact with each other, but also our partners. And we had to change some of the partnerships we have, or say goodbye to some of the partners because they do not value people. And so when we said that's a value, it is a filter by which we put things in. So if they don't have the same values, we are not going to be a good fit. That's why I say people don't usually think about their values, but it's really important. What are the things that are most valuable to your organization? Let them be one of those filters that you use things to pass it through. And the board is uniquely placed to figure out what are the things that are important to us. What do we need to be placing value on? And again, they do not have to be so huge as we're solving the world's problems or creating a world peace. If you do, that's fine. It's okay. But it also really talks about how you interact with the folks who are your staff, who are each other, any of those partnerships as well. Put them on paper. You don't have to necessarily publish your values if you don't want to. They could just be for you, but everybody at your organization should know what those values are. They should be able to tell you what those values are. You can call up anybody from the Nonprofit Center and they will tell you, we value people, but we value food too. We like having a good meal. We usually get a lot of work done over our meals. This is something that we value. We have other values too, but those are the two ones that we really like.
I have a question. Is that values for your board or values for your organization?
So those are values for the organization, but they're part of, so we're part of the university, like the board of the university, the board of the center. So we have like a combination conversation about it. We also have an advisory board who's part of the center who helps us specifically because they have know-how around nonprofits, and so they were part of our conversation as well for our values. Values for the entire organization. If you want to have separate values for the board, you can. I would caution just making sure that those two things line up really well, but you should be having values for the whole org. Yeah, great question. All right, a couple of potential other responsibilities that the board needs to be made aware of and that change depending on where you are at. The first one is those board meetings. These are just examples. You don't have to follow this letter of the law, it's just as examples. When you're starting off, your board might meet more regularly. You might have to meet monthly because you don't have a choice because there's a lot of stuff to do. As you continue going through the cycles, you might be able to change how often your board meets to either bi-monthly, I am always real cautious of the quarterly, because that's a lot of time to pass between when you last saw each other. And so then that 2-hour board meeting becomes a 6-hour board meeting because you have a lot of stuff to do. So I'm not a huge fan of quarterly. For some folks, it works for them. Not my bag, but totally up to you. But you decide when those meetings are going to be and what they need to be, about. You need to have working meetings. Do not just report out everything that happened since your last meeting and call it a day. You can do that in a consent agenda, where you put it all together into one thing, send it out to everyone, and it's your board's responsibility individually to read the thing. And if they didn't, you're not going to review it in your meeting. They should have read it before they got there. Your meeting should be about the actual work. What decisions do we need to make? What things do we need to be working on? Who do we need to be talking to or about? That is what needs to happen in your board meeting. If you look at your board meeting minutes and it is just a report out from the last time, have a conversation about those meetings. Because then it becomes, for everybody around the table, is this really a good use of my time? And you want for the board meetings to be a really good use of everyone's time. So figuring out the cadence of when your meetings are, what they're going to look like is really important. When you do onboarding for folks, that's something you need to tell them ahead of time. Please don't surprise people by saying, oh, we have board meetings on occasion, and they show up and you have a board meeting every month. They may not sign up for that. Tell them that during onboarding. Make sure that they understand that even in the interview process. This is how often we are expected to meet. And if there's like you can miss so many percentage meetings that take a lot of information. Stuff happens, you live your life, you have to go on vacation, of course. So if there's you can miss this many of them throughout the course of the year, put that in there as well. It's important to know. This part here about the counsel for the board chair and executive director and CEO is needed, or ED as needed as well, depending on how they do that. This is really talking about that communication and connection too, and what that looks like. And again, that changes over time. Because in the beginning, you don't have an ED 9 times out of 10. Or if you do, you get lucky and you do have one, that's awesome. But the connection between those two and how they connect in terms of the support will change over time. But you should have regular communication with your executive director. Again, if the executive director doesn't know who the board members are, huge problem. Not going to be good. They need to be actually taking part in those meetings. Hear me say that your meetings are the board's responsibility and not your executive director's. In terms of putting together your agenda, yes, we need to make sure that their input's in there. It's not their responsibility to type the agenda, send the agenda out, and send the reminders. That's your board's responsibility. Stop making it your executive director's responsibility. They got stuff to do. Take on the responsibility that your meeting, you need to run it. Now, they can help, and you want their voice in all of the pieces of it, but they got other stuff to do. They have an organization to run. It is your responsibility as the board to take care and do that.
Do they have to be at every meeting?
Up to you. It depends on how you want to run that and what that looks like. A lot of executives, I know for ours, will be there for all meetings. They don't vote for our organization. That's the way we have it set up. They don't have a voting, they're not a voting member, but they're a part of all of our meetings. Yeah. So that's the way that we decided to do it.
Oh, bro, I'm going to give you a different opinion. In fact, I was just walking by listening.
Yeah.
As organizations grow larger and larger, what we've been finding is that sometimes they do have staff support the board meetings. And for some organizations, having the executive director or the CEO as a voting board member is how they're set up. So I would posit that form follows function. Every board can take a look at where they are and do they need more staff support because they're having a larger reach. So for some of the organizations in this room, you actually have different models than what you're saying. So there's variety.
So we'll see with that one too. There's usually it's not the ED that usually does it, it's like an administrative assistant that's helping out. So as I've seen for some of them.
So
it depends on the size of the org for them too.
Sometimes it's the executive director, sometimes it's an executive man. And truthfully, I think there's an incredible amount to be said for the dynamic tension between the CEO and the board chair. So it's a partnership, it's a dance.
Yep.
And coming up with the agenda items are actually done together in concert.
And that's what, they should do them together. I'm not saying they should make the agenda ever without the executive director, But it doesn't, like, in our case, we had a problem where the executive director was like the person typing up everything and then going to the board person and being like, hey, is this what you want to talk about? Instead of it being an actual conversation between the two.
Partnership. The whole thing should be a partnership.
So we've had to change what that looks like
And
first.
I would say it's a partnership and should always be.
Yep.
But we have had some nonprofits who come to us and say, look, we don't have the executive director come to board meetings or know what's going on. And what I found in a lot of cases is that's a recipe for failure because it's a board CEO partnership the whole way.
Yep.
And you can't exempt the executive director from the governance function because they have to really fit the day-to-day and the long-term policy making.
And so like I said, they need to be, depending on your board and how you do that, you decide what that looks like for your org.
And that's the old life cycles. As organizations get older and more complex, they need more staffing, and so they change over time. And being open to changing over time is the important part. It's not always the same functions as the organization keeps growing.
Right. And it's you.
I was just going to say that on one organization I'm on, my frustration is the executive director does everything, but he does it because there's not enough people on the board willing to step in and do it. So it's like he's frustrated because he's like, well, go ahead, board, take over. So I've never heard what you said about it's really a board setting the agenda and running the meeting. But that only works if you have a good board. You know?
And that part of it is the expectation for it too.
I'm going to say it's the care and feeding of the board that is the CEO's role.
Yeah.
And so that CEO really has a wonderful challenge of really trying to sit down with each board member and the board chair and the officers and saying, we need board members to step up and you're their peers. We need you all to talk about it because I am the CEO or the executive director. I can't be doing the board governance because I don't have that perspective and I don't have that stewardship responsibility. And yeah, the board sets into a pattern and it takes some disruption to break a cycle that's dysfunctional. And we like to disrupt, by the way.
And I was gonna say, part of it is really the expectation of it too. And not saying they intentionally set it up so that particular board is not engaging.
It's the corporate culture that has
but
evolved, right?
Depending on what it looks like.
Yeah.
In that case, like I said, for the situations you had where it was like it came down always to like that person doing it, it might have been the culture they set up at some point in time or the expectations of the board members were like, of course this person does it.
COVID did a lot of that.
Yeah, I was going to say COVID made a huge problem.
Huge difference, and we're just recovering, and it's a great time to redefine the expectations and the functioning because, you know, there's Zoom meetings now. Not everything has to be in person. You know, when do committees have to meet in person? Do the board has to meet in person all the time? How much is social versus? So use we're out of COVID now as a way to kind of disrupt what you see as unhealthy board dynamics. Yeah.
And some of that is too goes back to again, we're not kicking anybody off just because, but some of those term limits and things like that too of some of those folks that are rolling out because maybe they just have come to a point where they're burned on it.
So I sort of have a question on that. Is it the executive director's job to identify the board members who aren't really carrying their weight or doing their job? Or is it other board members?
The board members to hold each other accountable. Now again, the executive director might have some
committee chair.
some connection to certain people and she sees it. But yeah.
Partnership. Yeah.
They should be holding each other accountable.
Yeah.
It goes back to what I was saying before about the valuation of the board, which typically people don't do a lot of. And some of that is the honesty of like, okay, on our board of 12 people, is everyone doing the thing we've asked them to do? Is everyone really pitching in and being engaged and connecting in that way? So that's an opportunity to naturally do that if you do a regular evaluation of your board, but in general, they should hold each other accountable. It's part of that. Yeah.
Well, I was just going to add on a more mature board that's got the staff support and the CEO is either a voting member or an active participant. One of the important things that we've obviously been doing for a while and have found great value in are executive sessions. So executive session where we allow staff to leave and just the CEO, and then a follow-on without the CEO and just the independent directors.
Yep.
The critical point on that, though, is you've got to make sure that the chair or a delegate on the board is looping back with the CEO on what was discussed, because then you create this dichotomy that just doesn't work.
Yeah, you don't want to ever create it where it's like an us and them thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Which I've seen that go wrong, and that's the case.
Absolutely.
So exactly what you said about looping back around is important, so that we don't create that.
But that executive session, I think, at least our observation post-COVID, has been a vehicle to solve for some of the challenges we saw, either disengagement or board members not pulling their weight. You can be radically candid in an executive session.
Yeah.
What about, how do you handle executive session, because that's a handful of board members and you have a large board? How do you not out policy make? What's that? Because you can't make decisions on behalf of the whole board.
Yeah, so
how do you balance
we've
that?
fallen into a routine of an all-board independent director executive session. So
All-board
literally the
independent
entire
director.
board minus the CEO. So
Oh, so
everyone
you
feels
can-
like they're part of it.
Okay,
Yeah.
so it's not an executive committee.
It is not an executive committee. That
session,
meets
so you kick the
separate.
staff out.
This
I'm
is
sorry,
just
I got confused
the
by
last
that.
10 minutes, 15
Yeah.
minutes, just an opportunity to be really candid,
Yeah.
Yeah.
really get some gut reaction, and you got to have that feedback loop with the CEO or
Yeah.
the executive director.
So our former board chair, Bob Rake, who's now on the Y, when he was board chair, the last 10 minutes of every meeting, he kicked out all the staff, including the CEO, and he just said to the board, how did we do at this board meeting and how are our committees functioning? And it was a nice chance to do some board feedback loop without that full formal appraisal thing, ongoing continuous improvement stuff. So it's a hard question to really get answers from, so you have to probe to get honesty, but boy, does it make a difference.
Like I said, that the honesty piece and that candor piece is important. And again, it goes even back to what I was saying before about you don't want the team of people, the AD, the staff, whoever performing for the board, because you don't get honest things from there. But you have to make sure that that's both understood, but also the relationship you built.
Yeah.
People are not going to just tell you the truth because they want to be nice. That's not fair. But if they feel like they can, they will bring those things to you and tell you the honest, both your board members and also your staff members.
Yeah.
So you create the opportunity for them to do that and the environment that they feel like they can actually have those conversations, for sure. But I like the way that you mentioned it in terms of the way that it's segmented out, and then you make sure that everyone's kind of back in the loop with it, so no one feels like they're in there talking about me and I have no idea what's going on, what's going to actually happen. So
No, but I mean, at the same time, we're constantly trying to elevate everyone, right?
Yep.
Increasingly, my observation is that nonprofit boards are having to operate at a higher level, just function at a higher level. And so it starts to feel a little bit more like a for-profit board with regards to the candor, holding each other accountable. We talked a little bit about the skill matrix earlier this morning. I mean, that stuff is important.
Yeah.
So, we've gotten to a place where the financials are in the consent agenda,
Okay.
and we've got board members who are not financially savvy, and that's okay. How are we going to lift everyone up? Because taking the financials off the consent agenda, just the routine monthly financials, probably not a good option because we really want to spend time talking about the stuff that really matters.
Right,
Yeah.
can you also that point? Consent agenda, I think for a lot of boards is a fairly new concept in Chester County especially.
Is that right?
Do you,
I don't know what that is.
that's what I was wondering.
Okay.
Can you talk about how you use a consent
Yeah.
agenda? Because we do use one at the community foundation.
do as well.
We use one at
Yeah.
the Y. What do you put on the consent agenda and what does that leave for the rest of the board?
I'll use my Robert's Rules standard definition, but consent agenda is just routine, non-controversial matters. Meeting minutes, in our case, monthly financial runs that are backward-looking, things of that nature that don't really warrant discussion and debate. We put it on a consent agenda. Back to Rose's point, it is provided well in advance. The expectation is that every board member's read them. If they've got a question on them, we're very clear about the opportunity to ask the senior staff that is associated with that topic or that material. So in our case, if you've got a question on the financials, feel free to reach out to the CFO ahead of time and get your question answered. And then you kind of roll through it. However, and I'm sort of a Robert's Rules kind of guy, and very important that you allow the board to pull something off the consent agenda if they want to in that meeting.
Yeah, and that's what, again, we're talking about the work of it. So if there's something from that agenda that they we still need to work on, then your meeting's a really good opportunity to work on the thing, not to discuss the thing, work on it, and then work in it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Throw it back to
So that's a good
committee.
time to do
Yeah, I mean, there are more. So for consent agenda, we send out all our meeting minutes and all the stuff that's routine, and just, it comes up as, everybody's here, approve the old minutes, approve items on the consent agenda, or is there anything you want to kick off? And that takes 30 seconds. And that is it. So you don't get a regurgitation of all the committee reports that you had
Yeah.
already read. But then look at what the business of the board meeting actually should be, and it changes the whole thing if you take out just, and I call it a regurgitation of committee, because you stand up and you see what you just read. No, instead take a look at across the committees in the organization, use the board brains in that room to say, these are things that are unsiloed. How can we deal with this on a larger governance perspective? So there's something, and so maybe it's strategic planning, maybe it's the core value statements, whatever you don't have that is the governance function. So you don't have to just regurgitate committee reports at a board meeting. In the next phase of organizations, there's different ways to do it. Yeah.
So I have a question. How far in advance of the board meeting do you generally send those out?
Well, since COVID, we actually email the whole board book and the consent agenda items a week in advance.
A week?
And our board meeting's on a Wednesday, so that gives people over the weekend to read the board book. And if they come to the board meeting and it looks like they actually haven't read materials, we have a parliamentarian who's a very scientific person who pretty much says, you didn't read your thing, I can tell. And so there's a little bit of public jostling and accountability if they didn't read the material. But a week ahead of time with the weekend seems to be enough. What is your practice? What do you find is useful?
My problem is our board meetings are the second Monday of a month. I can't get the financials done.
You can't, so you need to change your board meeting date. Yeah,
Well, that's
actually,
even more complicated.
yeah, we set our board meetings up for 2 years, and we very specifically looked at when we can close and get the financial reports together. And so our meetings are at the end of the month. And we changed that because you're right, if you don't have the information, you can't do governance, and you don't want to go back 2 months.
So
we changed our
are
meetings.
your committee reports or director reports there in the consent agenda?
Yeah.
Do they cover really, at some point, they're actually sort of covering the current month?
Yeah, they come
Right,
right
not
to that,
really
the day before
the
that.
day-
The
okay.
committees meet, 3 weeks before the board meeting, the minutes come out, actions of all the committees that need to really be talked about together in a sort of a partnership. That's what hits the board agenda, not the separate thing.
No, I get
Yeah.
that part. I was
Yeah,
just
I think the,
process.
It's the time sensitivity,
Process.
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
for me, and again, I'll use my for-profit hat, I serve on the board of my company as well. And if the topic warrants discussion and decision-making, it's got to be on the agenda. You can't really put that on.
Oh, absolutely.
So whether it's current month or prior month, I think becomes less relevant or becomes more relevant.
Well, over time,
Is it? Yeah.
becomes
Yeah.
less relevant, right? No, I'm familiar with the concept of a consent agenda. I was just
Yeah.
wondering
And then
how
on-
much
on the
time the
timing-
board members had to sort of review that material.
On the timing, the one thing that I often, and I know it's an unpopular thing to state, but giving board members the weekend, I think it's powerful. So if you are able to get your financials done by the Friday of the first week, maybe that is
I
enough
try to get
time.
them
The
done
banks
by
come through.
Thursday, but
The bank holidays,
it's
yeah.
the bank
We
holidays
changed the board
and,
meeting, yeah. We
you
had,
know, we have a very small staff.
Yeah, no, understood.
So-
And so, the financials, if you can give them the weekend, that's plenty, right? You don't need the whole week.
Yeah.
You can sort of set yourself in that
and you
routine.
really should run them through the finance committee before it gets board.
We only have 9 board
I
members,
was
so our
gonna say-
committees are generally 1 or 2 people,
So then it goes to recruiting non-board members to serve on the committee.
which we've been trying to do, but
We got
barely have a board, barely have a full board, so.
For all the rest of the, not that this is not, please continue. I just want to make sure everybody else, I know we're over time, we're running right into the 12:30 lunchtime, so I want to make sure people that want to get up and go do that.
Lunch is just every lunch you go to the minute.
So let me make sure you have time to do that. But the takeaway I wanted to leave with you too, and hopefully I said this enough times that it stuck with you, is that this will happen on a cyclical thing and be okay with that happening. So part of you being a board member is making sure that you both recognize it and also help steward the organization through the different cycles so that they don't feel like they're left in a lurch when it potentially comes to that decline moment, that you can catch it to go back around. In the event that you find that it is time to sunset the organization, they really need you to help them steward through that. There's a lot of pieces to that takes place. So.
Thank you.